All right, it looks like we are live this June 1st. Welcome to this session of Ask the Security Guy. I'm obviously not Holly Magnuson, the person you're used to seeing here. She's on vacation, and lucky for her, but hopefully everyone else seeing this will have vacation of their own sometime this summer. I'm her student worker, Michael Johnston. I'm a student here at APU, and our topic this month is cloud security. Be sure to use the Q&A app, should be located in the bottom right. You'll be able to ask questions, and I'll be able to see them, and we will be able to hopefully give you some degree of response. So our security master, Shawn Kohrman, can tell us a little bit more about our topic this month, cloud security.
Great, thank you. So yeah, we've been getting a lot of questions about, is the cloud secure? And the answers to that are complicated. There's a variety of contexts with which you need to look at the cloud. What are you trying to do? What problem are you trying to solve? What are you using it for? So that gets into a really long and detailed conversation. So what I thought I'd do instead was let's talk about a little bit about the top threats with cloud security and some ways to either things to be aware of or just things you can do to mitigate against it and when you're dealing with risk associated with cloud. So the first one we want to talk about is data breaches. As with any organization, cloud is no less susceptible to data breaches. It's really think of it as instead of having a server in your house or a server at work, your server is just somewhere else geographically, but the same risk still exists. Really, the number one threat when it comes to cloud security is compromised credentials and broken authentication. If you look at the old model of doing IT, where we kept this room with big servers and large air conditioning and a diesel generator out back, and that was where we kept everything. It was simpler to control multiple layers of access to the network, and in the cloud model, that is all still done, but the data center is not inside of our control. It's in some other part of the country usually, or around the world even. And the primary gatekeeper now is authentication. Your username and password is what really is the first and last line of defense. So that's why it becomes even more critical to maintain proper passwords and to make sure that you're using passphrases instead of passwords, using a password manager so you don't lose your mind, trying to keep track of 5 dozen different accounts, and those kinds of things. Another risk that you deal with, and it's not really something your average end user can control, but more something to be aware of. Think about hacked interfaces and APIs. So the things that interact with the data, the web page, the applications that you're interacting with on your phone that talk to a server somewhere in the cloud. Sometimes those can be compromised. That's a risk you can't really mitigate against, but you just need to be aware of what's going on in the world around you, pay attention to the news, and if you see a service or that you use being compromised, double check. Exploited system vulnerabilities. Cloud is just as susceptible as anyone else to this. This is typically related to best practices and those kinds of things. So if the vendor that you're using, Google, Apple, it doesn't really matter, if they're not keeping their infrastructure up to date, there's a risk that they could be vulnerable. And that's again not something that's within the user's control, but it is something you need to be aware of. Another thing related to our account security that we already talked about is account hijacking, and this is where a bad actor would take over an account. There was a classic case of this a couple years ago where actually a security writer had his account compromised. It started through, I believe, Twitter and then Amazon. Ultimately, they got into his iCloud account and deleted all of his data. Family pictures, everything that he had backed up, they deleted it not only in iCloud, but they purged it from all of his devices as well. So his iPhone, his iPad, everywhere that was connected got dumped. Now, ultimately, he did get his data back through a data recovery service, but that cost him several $1,000s. And at the end of the day, what was found was a weakness in the way the customer service tools with several companies handled password resets. Now that those problems have since been fixed, but the attacker basically just called into customer service, had a very small bit of data about him, and was able to effect a password reset and then get into his accounts and change everything to their ownership and essentially hijack his accounts. So that's kind of the that works. Now, since that incident, that raised a lot of awareness throughout the community, and a lot of companies have strengthened the measures they have for account verification. But it's still possible. If you have the right answers to the right questions, you could probably talk your way through a customer service password reset with some of these cloud organizations. And as we saw, that particular case was with Apple. So, no one's impervious.
Is there anything that you would advise us to do to be able to enhance our security on our end as far as what you were just saying goes?
So the best method that enabling multi-factor or two-factor authentication. And what that does is it brings your cell phone into the mix. You'll get a text message with a special code that you enter in addition to your username and password at the time you log into the service. Now, it's not entirely foolproof, but it is much more difficult to work around that layer of security than otherwise. And it's pretty simple to use. You go to log in, it sends you a text, you type in the code that's in the text message, and off you go. So it's something you have, something you know, and it brings in that extra layer of security, because if they don't have the phone to get the text message, you can't log into the service.
Okay. Looks like we have one question here.
Sure.
What is this ABP that was enabled on our computer? Ad blocking software?
I'm sorry, which?
That's all the question says, is what is this ABP that was enabled on our computer? Wondering if it's ad blocking software.
I'm not sure what that's referring to.
I'm not sure either. Perhaps it was just pop-up that happened when they were at a website.
Okay. Well, we can circle back with
AdBlock Plus.
Okay.
That's what ABP is. I didn't know that was enabled on APU computers by default.
I'm not sure that it is, but that's
Oh.
something we could follow up with. Do we have any other questions?
Those are the only ones.
Okay. So going list of threats, another thing that we need to consider when you talk about cloud, but again, this is also a risk for an on-premise security, is malicious insiders, people who work within the organization and have ill intent, either financial or some other type of intent. They can destroy data, they can cause havoc, they can open security risks to the outside or security risks to known outsiders. The risk when you're dealing with cloud as well. It doesn't go away just because you outsource your data. Another risk is called APT or apps. They're persistent threats. They're very difficult to remove. And again, it's you're as likely to find them within a cloud infrastructure as you are anywhere else. Um, Another risk is data loss. A classic example that I'll use is Dropbox. Um, Seems to be very popular. I've heard a number of cases now where users, personal users of Dropbox, not enterprise users, um, lost significant amounts of data because Dropbox encountered some type of hardware failure within their organization. So at the time, what the response that they received from Dropbox when they called to complain was that there was no redundancy for their data, and if it was lost because of a hardware failure, that was within the terms of use, and so sorry.
Well, that doesn't sound good. Is that information available to the general public, like to
That
if
would
we're
have been,
researching cloud storage?
yeah, that would have been in the terms of use. So that fine print that we never read,
Yeah.
by using this service, I agree to. Yeah, read that stuff carefully. And that's actually what we're going to get to in uh, our next threats. The most When you're dealing with cloud services, the relationship is critical because you don't have control of the physical servers. You don't have control of the network. You don't have control of anything really. What you do have control of is through a legal contract with the service provider. Now, either free or paid, when you click to I agree to the terms and conditions, you need to understand what it is you're signing off on. Because as an individual, where you're just saying I accept, or if you're a business and you're paying for the service, contract language or those terms of use is critical in a cloud model because that determines the rules of the relationship. What can you expect? What can you not expect? What happens if something bad happens? What's their obligation and what's yours? And then lastly, what I would say is when we never advise you to put all your eggs in one basket, right?
Mhm.
Just old school saying. Well, the same is true with cloud. If you're going to store your stuff in the cloud because it's convenient, that's great. Have a local backup as well. Make it a practice to once a month, if all of your pictures are stored on Google Photos or Picasa or whatever online sharing service that you use to store your photos, download them and back them up from time to time, and have a local copy that's offline, just in case.
Yeah, I suppose it's always a good idea to have multiple backup sources instead of, like you said, just one.
Yep. Because at the point at which you limit yourself to just one is the point at which that one will fail at some point.
Yep.
So it's just risk mitigation at that level. So just basic things. I mean, is the cloud secure? Yeah, in many ways it is, but it's as secure as your username and password. It's as secure as the practices they use to protect your data. So, for instance, if you looked at the LinkedIn breach that happened a few years ago, they were storing your passwords using a hashing method that was known to be dirt simple to reverse. Okay? That didn't come to light until there was a breach.
So, are there any websites you could recommend that would give the regular user information about a cloud storage service, like what kind of security they use, its rating, information like that?
Most companies will publish some information about that themselves on
Yeah.
their own website, and you can usually call customer service and ask those types of questions. So you're typically going to get a little further with directly contacting customer service because they're not going to want to publish some of that information.
Yeah.
But if you're an existing customer or a potential customer, you can usually talk to them and they'll give you some insight into what they do to protect your data. Another thing you can do is, to be very careful and make sure that you're using separate passwords for separate accounts. If you use the same password for several different accounts and one of those services gets compromised, you've just given somebody access to everything you're on. And the most critical of those is always your personal email.
Yeah, good passwords or passphrases, as the saying around here is,
Yep.
and using a good password manager, like we recommend LastPass or Dashlane,
Mm-hmm.
to be able to store long, complex passwords that you don't have to memorize, and just the one very solid master password that you have to access it.
Yep. I mean, at the end of the day, password managers are what help us keep our sanity, or what's left of it.
Yeah.
So, and then make sure you read the terms of use. If you're going to sign up for a cloud-based service, make sure you understand exactly what you're signing up for. Because some of those, the language is pretty clear about what you can and cannot expect. And it's typically in a worst case scenario, but like I said, I've run into people who have lost years of data because they didn't read the terms of use, and Dropbox had a hardware failure and they lost their stuff.
Yeah,
There were no backups and there was no redundancy.
that would be frustrating.
So yeah, I mean it's a tough thing, and I know small companies I've worked with that literally have terabytes of data stored in the cloud. Now, granted, they're using a different service for their file storage, and it is quite secure and redundant. But they're also using offline backups. So if something does happen, there's a secure way for them to recover.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then again, to reiterate, if possible, use the two-factor or multi-factor authentication. It's very simple to use. It's quite convenient, in using your cell phone. Google and Microsoft both and Apple do great, do have a great way of working. And it's just another layer of security that's much more difficult to break through. It's not impossible, but it raises the bar significantly.
And so is that what essentially businesses are asking for, like Facebook or Google or even Netflix? They're asking you to give them your phone number. Is that facilitating that two-factor authentication?
Not for all of them. For Google, yes, it's part of your security setup, and they will send you, but you still have to turn on two-factor authentication.
Okay.
But it's also part of the security recovery practice that they have set up, so that if you forget your password, your Google password, they can text you and verify you via the cell phone that you entered. So I had a case recently with a family member where they changed their password, wrote it down wrong, couldn't remember what they changed it to, and hadn't updated their security questions in a very, very long time. So they couldn't remember the answers to any of the security questions either. Fortunately, they did have their current cell phone number in there because one of the times they logged in, Google had prompted them to enter it.
Mm-hmm.
So even though we weren't able to remember any of the answers to their security questions, but because we had her cell phone number plugged in, we were able to get access back into her Google account through that. And that was quite a problem for that individual, because bank accounts were tied to it, financial records, everything was going into that email account.
Yeah. Yeah, we have a lot of information just centered around our personal email.
Mm-hmm. She was getting electronic delivery of bills, so it became a problem very quickly. So as is often the case, we look at security as a inconvenience or a step that we don't want to deal with. At the end of the day, it's what protects you and your data, and there are lots of people out there who want to do bad things.
Yeah, there's no shortage of bad people trying to take advantage of this.
Absolutely not. So do we have any other questions?
Nope.
All righty. Well, that's all we had for today.
Well, I guess. Are we making a short Ask the Security Guy?
If we don't have any other questions,
Yeah, just the one about the AdBlock Plus.
okay. We'll follow up with that person offline.
Okay. All right. I guess no more questions. Then we've finished all that we had. There's upcoming hangouts. It's gonna be this month, I believe. Final Friday wrap up and hang out with IMT. I'm not sure what the exact schedule or topic for those will be, but you'll all be receiving emails about viewing times and topics. So keep your eyes out on your emails and keep your security high. Uh, I guess goodbye from the Ask the Security session.
All right. Thank you all.